Hey, Alex, how you doing, sir? 4 mile walk this morning. I got that in. Saturday morning learning, chapter 5 in Gil Review's book, then Guy to Cube. Now on to this. So just like everything all together all at once. It seems like we do have some echo though. So let me pause there.
Echo.
Let us know in the chat. We're still working on it, episode 14.
How about this?
There we go. Good, better, gone, awesome. So good comments coming through.
Yeah.
Well, then we'll start again. Alex P, Alex D, having fun. Episode 14. Project or planning a Power BI project.
Yeah. Just because I'm good with Power BI doesn't mean I'm good with OBS. We have firmly settled that question. So who knows?
That's funny, man.
Yeah. So let's see. I am getting my first shot tomorrow.
Really?
I got an appointment. There's a vaccination site in Washington in Yakima that is open to all. And it's a 2.5 hour drive away. So be a little bit of an adventure, but
that was going on here in Missouri where everyone was driving like 2 hours, 3 hours. Yeah. Unfortunately, one of the local buddies here, he drove 2.5 hours. They said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have that shot for you that we told you we did." So he had to turn all the way back around. So I was like, "Oh my gosh." Luckily, was able to get one here at a mass vaccination event like last week. It kicked my butt though, like cold, violent shaking, and then kind of sweating profusely. So have fun.
My wife got hers last Saturday. So once we're
that's great to hear.
Yeah, and you've got your new job, which is
yep.
I hope nobody commented on Twitter about our thumbnail. I was a little disappointed.
Mark Walter asked in kind of the Saturday morning learning, he was like, "What was the cat thing?" And I was like, "Oh, it's Power BI cat team." And he's like, "I get it now." So maybe we're just a little more subtle than we thought.
It was from Alex's announcement tweet. He used that image for himself, and so yeah.
Love it. Well, today's topic, planning a Power BI project. I know we've kind of hit home on this in the past, and especially as we kind of talk about it a little bit more today. All the different questions, maybe thoughts. I think Power BI is becoming a lot more complex than like a few years ago, where it was very simple to say, well, here's what Power BI is, or here's what it does.
Mm-hmm.
It's just branching off more and more. What are your thoughts there, Alex D?
Yeah, I mean, Power BI is not just for your sales dashboard anymore. And there's so many different things you can do. So many things. Like, you need to take a step back and plan what you're gonna do. And just decide, like, what are my goals? And so I think we should talk about how do you figure out what your goals are, and then what those translate in Power BI, and then finally, maybe even before we do any of that, like, what should you never use Power BI for? Because I think at this point it's easier to list what Power BI is not good for than to list all the scenarios it is good for.
Great comments coming through already. Context is everything. Chris Wagner saying, "Don't get the shot, run away."
Yeah. Let's see. I'm gonna put him in a timeout for that comment.
Well,
it's my first YouTube moderation action.
Oh, I love it. Well, let's start out with maybe like a baseline, some of the objectives and things that are like, hey, here's what you really need to hit home on. If you want to kind of jump over to my screen, and I had this conversation with some users, kind of in a St. Louis Power BI user group, not last month, maybe the month before, but talking about the various report types. So just like right off the bat, what is it we're trying to accomplish when we're starting to plan or even thinking about our project? various report types that now exist. Kind of just first right off the bat, you had alluded to more of like a dashboard, a scorecard. Here's your sales, kind of at the high level of kind of management, executive decision makers. So these are more of those analytical type, very simple, very straightforward. I think I said my perfect Power BI report is a thumbs up or a thumbs down, just on a blank canvas. But this is Power BI at its core, right? This is what it is, what it was designed for. I'll pause there. Alex, the accurate, kind of looking at the timeline of Power BI.
Yeah, I mean, this is BI, right? The core of business intelligence is tell me about the most numeric things in my business, how much money I have, and where it's coming from.
Some count average. Give me the big three, right?
Yeah.
So we've kind of moved on from the traditional like BI and Power BI and more of the operational. This is really unlocked through like the paginated report type of functionality where it's here's what I need day to day. Give me a big flat table and give me a list. I'll figure it out as I kind of go line by line. People were doing this with kind of the export from Power BI, dashboard report where it's, well, I can get 160,000 lines at a time. It was interesting that people were looking at Power BI in that lens, right? Where, well, I didn't really care about the visuals. I just had this matrix of data that I needed to export and kind of move it on to the next system.
Yeah.
I'll pause there. Your thoughts?
I've done a lot of operational work. My first sort of computer job was designing data entry and data reports to enable folks that were doing lab work so they knew what to do in the lab. And these, you have to really tightly work with your end users to make sure that they are fit their workflow. It's not just, oh, if the report is bad, it'll be a little confusing or won't quite answer the right questions. It's like, if it doesn't fit their workflow, it's worse than useless. Power BI can be good for these, or you may need a paginated report. There's a couple of different reasons. Either they're not working at a computer, and so they need something to print out, or the sequencing of the data is very important, and so you need the page structure so that they can feel like they're going through it sequentially, even if they're on a computer. And for some operational use cases, they need to take notes. And now, like I alluded to at the beginning, this is one of those use cases where Power BI may not be a good fit. Yep. You may need to move the data into Excel for their end use.
Which brings us to ad hoc, right? The flexibility of anything at any point in time, generally kind of in the pivot table, which is still like very foreign to most people. Like, I love the comment always, 95% of Excel users only know 5% of the program. So even a pivot table is like that 6%.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is the full flexibility, right?
I saw someone post on Twitter that they give trainings to accountants, and 95% of them have never heard of Power Query, which, like, it's perfect for them. But I think for ad hoc, like, the best tool to use is the tool that the ad hocer is most comfortable with. So where your data lives, you can get it into Power BI, you can get it into Excel. But like, I never use Excel unless I'm talking to someone who prefers to use Excel, because a few years ago I got frustrated with Excel and just said I'm not using it anymore. And so I've gotten really comfortable doing Power BIs that I don't save.
Really?
And especially now that I mostly do demos, I almost never save Power BI files. I just live connect to our cube and do something and then throw it away. And so it works great. But that may not work great for you.
So many questions for me on that one. Obviously, the live connect is great. If that exists, if you have kind of that shared data set. But I would never do an ad hoc request in Power BI just because, and I love Sheila's Law, as they called it in Saturday Morning Learning. Whenever I approach Power BI, I want something that's going to be long-term, sustainable, can grow. If my boss shot me a message and said, "Can you get me this result by the end of today?" I don't know that I would ever try and undertake that in Power BI desktop. It just feels like it's too slow for kind of that quick hands on keyboard, get an answer, get it out the door. Would you ever do anything ad hoc in a Power BI desktop experience, Alex D, or do you think like, hey, it would take way too long? I'll pause there.
So one, we have a great cube. I mean, okay, it's not a great cube. It's as good a cube as I can design. So Live Connect works fantastic. And even when we didn't necessarily have that, I think it was great for ad hoc because there's a couple things. First of all, if you're doing Power Query in Excel, you can't save partway through making your Power Query. And so for an ad hoc report, I'll often, not finish in one sitting. And so that's one of the main reasons why I threw Excel out the window, is that I was losing work because I couldn't save as frequently as I needed to. And the autosave in Excel had taught me that I could be comfortable, and then Power Query just played on those expectations. So, yeah, that was the big reason.
So I'm loving the chat here today. Just a lot of great comments coming through already. Kind of Ben was calling out Excel is great for models that require inputs, kind of modeling. Analyzing Excel helps expedite that time just to wrangle those inputs. Mark is also saying, hey, I'm only using it maybe to demo in Power BI if it's kind of that quick win, just more of the art of the possible. Use Excel like a fancy calculator now. Love hearing that too. So a lot of good comments. If I was to kind of move on to, some of the various tooling that exists within this framework, obviously Power BI Desktop is that PowerPoint for data-like experience. Yeah, I would highly encourage anyone to go listen to Casper's podcast he did with Kim. That was awesome. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to that, Alex.
I did. Yeah. I mostly took away from that their discussion about what it's like to be a PM, because, I'm a PM at Microsoft who thinks he should be better. But they definitely also had some good discussions about making reports easy for folks. And honestly, this is something you and I have talked a lot about. What does PowerPoint for data mean? I think the product team used it quite a bit to say, like, hey, we want the UI in Power BI to look and work like PowerPoint's does. But I think it means something different.
Well, her big point was, are we Photoshop for data, which is customizable to the nth degree, or are we PowerPoint where it's hopefully drag and drop, kind of like a canvas?
Right. PowerPoint is PowerPoint for photo editing and for almost any use case. If you want to do it quickly, like you open up a PowerPoint and you can just there's a feature there to make it easy for you, and you don't have to have a plan. You're not going to build yourself some technical debt, right? Like if you make a slide that's got some ridiculousness on it, it doesn't ruin everything else. And so when I see PowerPoint for data, honestly, it's Excel, but it means that someone who isn't an expert can start working and precisely do those types of ad hoc works. But in the case of this slide, what they mean is it works like PowerPoint. It's not as scary as you think.
Yep. So report builder just being classic.
Yeah.
It is full on, 1990s Microsoft design. And Finland always makes fun of it too. He's fully aware, needing some freshening up or whatever else it may be. But you got to learn it if the needs are kind of those kind of operational day-to-day, if it's just that big flat table export. This is where I'm excited, at least with premium per user. Just there's going to be a lot more content. I've struggled finding good material to learn from. So for me, it's really just picking things almost from the internet archives of 20 years ago. How were people doing it in SSRS?
Yeah.
Have you started learning it all, Alex?
No. Back when I worked in the lab, I used Crystal Reports, which was pretty much the same type of thing. and the data backend for that thing was bonkers. The LOB software we used would generate an access file from a set of SQL queries that you had bound to a report type. And then when it printed, it would save the access file and generate a crystal report that pointed at the access file and then print that. Yeah, it was crazy. Anyways, I've never used Report Builder because I started using Power BI when I came to Microsoft. And inside of Microsoft, like, we're basically paperless. And there are some use cases where paginated reports would be decent, but Excel is fine. And so, like, there's no need to print. There's no need to have the actual pagination. And so some of the other use cases around, like, having order controlled and making it take notes, like, Excel is almost better.
Well, that brings us to Excel, right? Where it's, let's just centralize around the Power BI data set.
Yeah.
Like Live Connect, drag and drop, be done with it. Especially if it's that ad hoc scenario where it's just answer the question, move on. I'm really excited, at least for what they demonstrated at, I believe it was Ignite, where it's like, all right, you can now live refresh an Excel online report or table. That's going to be incredible. Just for the people who don't want the PowerPoint for data-like experience, they just want an Excel-like. I'm ecstatic, just as an Excel guy at heart.
Yeah. So Jessica, why would we want to use paginated reports? So if you need to send customers an invoice, use paginated reports. If you want to, if you've got like a retail business and you want to send a report to your store managers that they can print out and, you know, or do inventory on, or like if you need, like, paginated reports is fantastic for that. But if you've got tablets in all of your stores, maybe Excel is better for some of those inventory type workloads or like operational use cases. But most folks don't, or if they have a tablet, it's just for transactions. And yeah,
I love it. Everyone's already lighting up here with your comments about crystal reports. People are like, is that still a thing?
Yeah.
Everyone's like, oh yeah. And business objects and kind of all these other kind of universes that exist. So knowing that there's 3 types of different reporting styles, operational, analytical, ad hoc, there's potentially 3 different tools to also use: desktop, report builder, Excel. Things are just becoming more and more complex. I like this decision tree that I try to throw together, which hopefully makes no sense to anyone, because this is how I think it feels probably to new users that are coming into the application, where it's just, I have a need. What do I need? What is the decision tree? I would say Power Pivot Pro, kind of P3 Adaptive, as they're now called, they have some of the best decision trees that I've seen, but it's still very difficult to try and determine, as the end user, what is it that I need or want. If it really is just these summarized insights, Power BI Desktop, get it there, get it interactive. You know, maybe long term, it's something that you're going to start thinking about, well, how do I scale with this? So, you know, all the fun stuff behind the scenes. If it is more of kind of the widespread distribution and collaboration, my mind is starting to race towards large audiences, which then thinks about row level security or object level security now, flexibility to answer as many questions as humanly possible, you know, within the confines of that data set without getting too out of control.
Yeah.
Export to crowd. So when we talk about the report builder, if it is just a flat table that someone needs, is it for an actual need, or is it to get it into another system, kind of like a data munging? If that's the case, Power BI is not your tool. You should be using proper ETL or Power Automate or something to that effect.
Yeah. I think if we talk about what Power BI is worst at, data entry is bad, but there are ways to make it work. The thing Power BI is worst at is storing data.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was coming up on kind of the Guy in the Cube too, where they were talking about, well, we want to connect to our analysis services cube, and we're going to bring one table into another data set and kind of create just this complicated web. And Matthew Roche has a great article there too. Are you building a BI house of cards, kind of feeding one analysis cube into another, into another, into another? Data dictionaries, compression, uncompressing all of that. It just takes a lot of resources. And then, of course, just here at the very end, if it's an emergency, I say get it done. I always just say get over to Excel. But it sounds like some other people may use Power BI Desktop for maybe in those emergency cases, if a cube exists that supports that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't even necessarily need to have a cube that supports it, because, I mean, whether you're in Excel or you're in Power BI, if there's no good cube for your emergency, you're roughly going to do the same work. Because if there's no good cube, all of the work is getting the data formatted correctly, and you're going to do that in Power Query. Maybe in Excel, you're going to not do that in Power Query, but that's a mistake unless the data was actually already the way you wanted it, and you just needed to write some sums. And like we talked about earlier, the Power Query experience in Excel is just bad.
See, I like Power Query in Excel. I was doing it this week.
No, it's great, but then if you need to refer back to your Excel or open another workbook or save, like, I mean, these are not niche use cases. These are central, important use scenarios that are just completely locked up by Power Query. And if you want to bail out, you need to, like, load your query just to save or, yeah. It
is weird that you can't minimize the window and continue editing in your Excel kind of worksheet layer. Especially this far on, right? Like, it's been there for like almost 10 years. Why isn't able to be edited?
Yeah, I think it's some sort of architectural thing because Excel doesn't spawn multiple processes, and so it's actually running in one process. And they'd have to re-architect Excel, and that, with all the backwards compatibility, is like a big no-no. So
you break Excel, you break the world, right?
Yeah. But Arun said on this interview he did with Rob Colley the other day that he meets twice a week with the head of Excel product management, and I don't know why he talks about anything else, because I mean it's such a big one. So we've talked a little bit about how you might choose what type of end user experience you're going to deliver.
But it's becoming more complex, right?
Yeah.
So how are you approaching your planning? Maybe within your teams, Alex?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first question, sort of the Uber question, is like, is this a good project for my team? And my team is pretty specialized because like we're basically a data warehouse team, and so the answer is almost always no, but like in general, like let's assume the answer is yes. This question is a good fit for my team versus another team. I really like this, and I'm going to switch over to my screen really quick. I really like this blog post by Caitlin, and I don't actually like using a form, but I love the way she frames these questions. And before we go any further, I'm just gonna, Johnny, you said data warehouse teams always say no. I would say we try really hard to say yes. However, we don't own or build reports. And so we always say, yes, we love that use case and we want to support it, but you need to bring us an analyst because we cannot build you a report. And so, and we tell folks all the time that they should use Databricks, because they're like, hey, can I do this? I'm like, well, the cube doesn't support that use case yet. We're working on it. It's 3 months down our roadmap, but just write a little SQL just like a couple lines more than select star, and you can bring it into Power Query, no problem. But not everybody is excited about the just write a little SQL. Anyway, that's enough of a detour here. So I love the way Caitlin frames these questions about how you talk to your users. Like this first question, what's more important, getting the answer quickly or getting the answer, an accurate answer? And you could go down along the lines here. Like, do you want me to build something that's scalable, or do you want me to knowingly make something that I'm going to throw away to give you an answer quickly? Because I can do stuff much faster if I'm not trying to follow best practices. And most projects are not things that you, like by quantity, are not things that you spend weeks and weeks on. So most projects are going to be throwaways, because like realistically, how many multi-month projects can you work on, right?
I've talked about this too. Is it's just like incredibly difficult to build something of tangible value that scales over multiple quarters, months, whatever it may be. But it's very easy to create busy work. Like, I can just send you a Teams message and say, go build me this thing, answer this question, and then by the time you deliver it, they're like, oh yeah, we don't need that anymore.
Well, and lots of managers, they think a lot about their business and they come up with questions like hypotheses, and they don't know if it's going to generate value, but they're just curious. And so they need to ask the question. Like, they don't even know what the value of it is. And so being like, that's why having a good cube is really important, because there's so many business questions that the value of answering them isn't high enough in the individual to build a report, but in aggregate, one of them is going to cause your leadership to have a breakthrough that creates real value.
So I love Donald's comment here in the chat. He said, you need to work at the speed of business.
Yeah.
I'd be very curious for those who maybe handle like intake processes or questions. How do you determine what is just general curiosity? Yes, I have the time to go explore this, versus I'm sorry, we're way too busy, we can't do that for you.
Yeah.
So you have a fine balance there.
Yeah, there is. And this blog post has a really, really fantastic question that I just love. Will this deliver business value within 90 days? That can be a fantastic question to ask. You do have to be a little more tactful sometimes. But one of the things, if you have a much more formal team, so in our group, we have analysts that are basically like, they are bound to particular leaders, and like their job is to make sure that the leader has the answers that they need. And they basically only do ad hoc work. And then we have some teams that don't have a specific remit, and they have a formal project backlog. And when they get asked questions, like they say, great, we have a 3-year roadmap. Like, what thing do you want to prioritize in order to get your question answered or get this feature delivered? And I'm definitely in the second category, where I have an ADO of Azure DevOps board of all the features we want to build, and there's like 100 features on there. And so when someone asks for something, it's like, okay, is this going to be in the April sprint? Well, if so, what are we going to cut? And on the other hand, these other analysts, like, their life is that they come in and they get a request, like their leader knows everything that they personally asked them for, and like they just are going to have to jump to it. And like my job is to make their lives easier. But these are amazing questions, I think.
The chat is blowing up, man.
Yeah.
So Gavin Cork had a great comment here. Having a team with multiple disciplines is becoming more important, particularly with the rise of self-service. So everyone really kind of enjoyed that. I love Jessica Jolly's comments here. So if the customer is willing to pay for it, then there's probably more than idle curiosity. and this kind of comes back to the internal versus external building of content too that we've talked about in the past, where it's, hey, if someone has specs and they've got dollars, then they're willing for you to go build it for them, whether tangible, whether curious, or just busy work. If that's how they want to spend their money.
Yeah. But
I love Ben's comment though. For my industry, does this have a material probability to optimize behaviors / actions inside kind of the box store in this example? I think you've talked about that too, right? Like, is there an action that's going to be taken off of this data or off of this value or kind of this information?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the questions that's in this blog post is, what action will this, what decision will you make or action will you take with this data? And that's really powerful. If the answer is concrete enough, I spend so much time like doing reporting for sales executives that the answer is, well, it helps me decide what to emphasize with my teams, or helps me articulate to leadership what's important. It's a lot less concrete, but lately we've been working on some reporting that goes out to our individual field sellers, and it's much easier to say, like, listen, one, we spend X amount of time pulling this data manually. Like, great, the field has spoken that they value this data because they spend their time there. And two, like, the opportunities surfaced in this data generates X amount of revenue. It's relatively easy to figure out. And like, man, it's so much easier to get budget for those types of projects. Yeah, they're also harder because now I have to like GTM them to 300 people.
Yeah. So that was something you and me kind of talked about before the stream too, is like having a team that can centralize around it, around a request, as opposed to I am one individual, I am the jack of all trades, I'm the Jill of all trades that does everything. It has to process not only the incoming request, the planning, the hands-on keyboard activities. Like, what have you found successful, and what have you also found like, this is almost like slowing us down, having so many cooks in the kitchen?
Yeah, so I think every organization needs both types of work. And if you're a small enough company, then that just means that the person doing reporting has to be able to context switch between something like these questions are really important. Is this going to be durable? Or is this a one-time thing? And if you're a big enough company, you probably should try to have different people doing those requests, those types of work. And you need to be thoughtful about who's doing those types of work, because it's easy for different people to feel like they're in the worst job in those different functions. But I mean, having a backlog can make things tough, especially because, I feel like with BI features sometimes, especially in the cube development, some things work in 10 minutes and some things take weeks. And sometimes, like, we've been working on adding daily revenue to our cube, which right now just has monthly revenue. And this is going to take us from having a 500 million row fact table to a 7 billion row fact table. I can't tell you until we finish this feature whether the user experience is going to be acceptable. And so, like, yeah, it's going to take us 3 weeks to do what we plan on doing, but if it doesn't work fully in memory, like, we're going to have to do a composite model. And if that doesn't work, we're going to have to hire a consultant to help us tune our direct query interface to make it faster. And, like, I don't know how long that's going to take. And, yes, we've got commitments around when we're going to deliver it, but, like, it could take 10 times as long. Yeah.
So many great comments come through here. Once again, I kind of refer back to Sheila's law, build for sustainability. Something that's small eventually catches fire, and then you really have to start scaling it, to those larger audiences or larger data set kind of sizes here. Ben is already getting asked for hourly sales, so he's kind of feeling that pain of, you start out with this high level of summarized insights, and then well, how can we drill further and further and further?
So
I mean, it grows, right?
The great thing about going down more granular, I mean, this is one of the things I love about tabular models, is we've been doing some analysis on what the memory costs will be to go from monthly to daily, and none of the keys get more granular. The highest cardinality field in the model is still going to be the highest cardinality field in the model. We're just going to have a lot more like rows of relatively low cardinality, we're going from 500 million to 7 billion, but the number of unique values in the fact column is not going to, it's not going to 100x or 30x, because there just aren't that many 4-digit numbers. Like once you start subdividing sales down more and more, like there just aren't that many numbers when you get up into the billions. And so like going to hourly wouldn't scare me too much. Now the cube's already 50 gigs, so we can't really buy a bigger premium SKU to really get any overhead at all. But if you had, like, it wouldn't be that expensive. So
thinking a little bit more about this, Jessica called out maybe there should be like a budget allocation for blue sky questions, where what if we went and did a little bit further? What if we got a little bit bigger?
So
thinking about the form, like, is the form there to almost like stop the request from growing out of scale? Like, how do you control that kind of scope creep? And I don't even call like scope creep like a bad thing, right? Like, if you deliver something with tangible value and it answers a question and it leads to additional questions, like, that's a good thing. But how do you control that, especially thinking about budget now?
So you can do that, and absolutely, like, anybody who's doing like a sprint framework should not overbook their sprints. They should underbook their sprints, because they're gonna, things are gonna come up, whether that's a new ad hoc request that's really interesting or a bug. Like, you need extra capacity, and having an explicit budget for that totally makes sense. But I also think, like, maybe you don't have time or need to explicitly budget time, money for blue sky questions, but somebody in your organization needs to be able to ask blue sky questions. And that's one of, the other day, Alex, we were, there was a salesperson who was asking internally, like, how do I talk about self-service? Like, I'm working with this company and they're entirely enterprise BI and they want to think about self-service. Where do I start? And he sort of got crickets for a couple days, because I was like, well, geez, that's a big question. But this is why self-service is so important, because somebody needs to answer blue sky questions, because those are gonna, like, in the long run, those are going to be the ones most impactful to your business. You just don't know which blue sky question. And so if your team doesn't have the bandwidth to do blue sky questions, then you need to spend more time empowering your stakeholders to use your pivot experiences, right? Or that means, so you're going to spend, like, one of the things I think about in terms of BI time management is that you spend 90% of your time on hard questions. Because if you have a really good cube, the easy questions should take minutes, right? But you definitely need to keep a handle on how many of these super quick questions are we able to answer. Because if you're not answering enough questions quickly, the things that are hard that you're spending all your time on will be really high value, and that makes it hard to say no and manage them. But if you have a really good self-service experience, then most high value questions will be answered quickly. Yeah.
So I love Benny's comment here. Blue sky questions are great and definitely have a place. I always struggle with the potential grow up story after. So yes, I can build it quick, but it needs to be operationalized. We're then screwed.
Yeah.
And I see this too, kind of over in the kind of the Reddit sub for Power BI. I have these, this folder of CSVs. We're appending it each month. It's growing out of control. The refresh times are insane, and people are asking, well, how big is that CSV? They're like, oh, it's like 600 million or 600 megabytes. And it's like, whoa, that's getting pretty large for a CSV. And then it's, well, where do you go after this? You should really have it in a database. You should do the next thing.
Yeah.
So incredible to think Power BI is allowing every analyst to have a database on their desktop.
Yeah.
That never existed before in my Excel role.
Oh, we had Access.
Microsoft Access, yeah.
Yeah. No, so I used to really think about this a lot because I was making work for myself. And so having a grow up, scale up story was really important. But these days, I think we overrate that. I think in BI, most report designs, visual experiences, like the actual design isn't that valuable. And if we're keeping a design for multiple years, I'm starting to question, like, is that valuable or not? Because some things will have evolved. And so I think the grow up story isn't that important, because for most projects that are created sort of in an ad hoc way, just being able to take the same code and add the scale to it, like, that's going to save you some time, but not nearly as much time as the discussions about, hey, now this project's really important and we're investing in it and we need to know what the exact right thing to build is. And so having to start from scratch on hey, we've got these visuals and they're formatted, or hey, we've got this Power Query and it's a mess. Starting from scratch there is not a big deal, because it's really not what's going to drive time. If you've got to totally start from scratch on something that you've already seen, it's just going to take a day. Yeah.
But you said the word for me, you said investment.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, you've been doing it for all these months and years. Why do we need to throw money at this? Why doesn't it scale with just having a SharePoint contain all of your files, or kind of this and that? It got you to this point where there's now value or tangible value to a large audience. Someone has to invest in it now, right? We just can't keep doing bubble gum and band-aids and hoping that we're going to get 10 years worth of data stored in the SharePoint to work.
I mean, either it's valuable and you should invest in doing it right, or it's not valuable, and the fact that you've hit this scale limit, it's just sorry guys, this is how it's going to be. And if it's valuable to invest, it's invaluable to invest lots of time talking to the users and thinking about what it is. And so redoing some of the code isn't that big a deal, unless you created something truly horrendous. I dropped in the chat
for those. Let us know if you have a scale limit story, or if you've hit those kind of conversations where you've had to kind of have the talk with your leadership to say, we need to actually invest money into this now. I would be very curious.
I mean, we obviously constantly have those discussions because, Bing.com, while the lesser loved of the search engines, generates billions of transactions a day. And so it's not possible to build a database that has all the data. Even your most, the data backend we use isn't even something you can buy on Azure. It's this crazy internal thing. I think I read somewhere that it has a single-digit percentage of the data in the world. Now, it's not just for Bing, but huge amounts of data with 8, 9, maybe 10 figures of CapEx to run. It just totally blows your mind. And so you can't have all the data. And so we're always talking about what are the limits. Okay, if we want to trade the user experience off, what can we do if we don't have all the data in the database? And how can, like, that's something I've been working a lot lately, is for salespeople, they want to have very granular data about an individual customer. I can't give them all the data about all the customers at that grain. So what's a good experience for a salesperson to hydrate their own PPIX with the data for the one customer they need this week?
Some more template files? Is that what you're kind of...
Yeah, I mean, template files could be good, but now you need a database that can handle, you know, a couple hundred concurrent users pulling against several terabyte table. You know, that's it's not impossible, but it's not great. And, you know, so anyway, we've been thinking a lot about that. And yeah, they're going to be in Power BI Desktop editing parameters. Like, that's not really something you think of as like, hey, salesperson, go do this.
Yeah, not at all.
So now, fortunately, our salespeople are relatively savvy and they work in data all the time, because that's what search advertising is. It's just data about data about data. Like that's all we do. But yeah. Anyway, so lots of stories there.
Yeah, so a lot of good kind of comments coming in through the chat.
Mm-hmm.
We have a SharePoint folder with 406 CSV files containing data exported from a system that isn't in the database. The refresh fails about 3 times a week. Sheila's comments there. I mean, these are the portions, right? Like, if it has gotten to a point of, I think you called it the scale limit, where it's like, hey, this is no longer working optimally. We need to invest in this. And like, as a self-service user, I don't know how to have that conversation. How do I go to management and say, I need you to start throwing money at this?
Right. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money. You know, the cheapest Azure SQL DB is like $10 a month.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, sometimes, like, a lot of, like, in my old job, but in a lot of organizations, there's a huge barrier to just getting out the credit card. And if you can just convince them that, like, hey, we need to spend any money at all, like, really solving problems like that are not that hard. But yeah, or it's a big organizational challenge. It turns out, as with most things in life, the people problems are actually harder than the technical problems. There are some technical problems that are really hard, but most of us don't work on those.
So many good comments here once again. Just Jessica coming back. It doesn't work, or it doesn't work right all the time. Kind of the two differentiators. I mean, Azure subscriptions, even getting those as a business user, you know, if I'm taking the journey from Excel into kind of the Power BI desktop, like, I never had an Azure subscription when I was building content. Like, there was no way they were going to give me that. There was no way they were going to give me a database. Power BI was just a Trojan horse that allowed them to kind of do that for me. Very interesting thoughts, like how you've had to wear multiple hats now, even going into like project planning and asking for budgets, and then getting kind of long-term funding as well. Because at any point in time, they could be like, hey, we're going to reduce kind of costs. Your project needs to scale down in some way, shape, or form. Especially with like your example where you were like, I've got a team of 10 developers working on this thing.
Yeah.
They could come tomorrow and say, hey, you need to get down to like 3.
Yeah, it's true. Something I say a lot with my internal stakeholders is, if you own a project with a budget, you must always ask for more money. If you ever fail to ask for more money in a convincing way, someone will ask you to spend less money.
Always.
In fact, even when you're asking for more money, they're going to ask you to spend less money. And so there's no stable budget ever. Either the budget goes up or the budget goes down. And so if you want to have a budget, you need to always have a plan to grow the budget.
Gosh. So asking about data lakes, just never having those opportunities to kind of have those conversations. I mean, it's something that we're all kind of learning here as we go. You know, the floodgates have kind of been opened. I mean, it's exciting times. I think this is where we always kind of enjoy, you know, the Guided Cube Saturday morning learning. It's like we're all kind of taking this journey together, but it's all new to me. Like, I worked in a form-based process where people told me what they wanted to have built. I built to specs, and then I just passed on to the next person for kind of maintenance. It's vastly different now, where a lot of people are having kind of long-term ownership of solutions if they don't have kind of an actual environment that says, all right, you built it, there's someone else down the line that will own it, and you just need to fund them. I don't know. There are just so many builders these days. It's very interesting to kind of see how everyone approaches it now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have that problem a lot, where we have a lot of folks who live in this ad hoc world that end up supporting stuff, and they want to pass it off to someone to maintain it. That's actually, I think, where we get into trouble. It's not the grow up story from I made something to last 10 minutes and then someone tells me I need to keep it around for 2 years. It's I made something to last and I've maintaining it and it's been a year and now I need to ask someone else to maintain it. That's where we see the most technical debt issues, where like you're trying to pass it off to a team that's used to maintaining reports and they have to understand what you did. It's not actually these ad hoc projects where the scale up is important. It's the regional sales dashboard that becomes the global sales dashboard. And that's why it's important for that's why we talk about all these best practices, but never forget that the ad hoc projects, that doesn't matter. You don't have to use a star schema for a project that you're not going to keep for 2 weeks.
Man, the chat today is just going wild. You must have brought it over from a guy in a queue, but I wrote down the technical debt handoff kind of being the one you really need to start thinking about. People are talking about maintaining 21-year-old VBA from a SQL Excel sales report. I mean, those things will exist, right? Something that's just been out there. We don't even know what the code does anymore. If we were to try and break it apart and rebuild it even in a modern context, no one has that complete lineage. So let's just keep the lights on. I've seen some of those here recently too, where it's just, we would love to get this over to Power BI or into, even the Power Platform at large. You look at, because Excel is just such a vast sandbox of capabilities, anything you can imagine you can build. It's just like, what you've done is perfect. If you were to try and unravel this would be so long. Either dollar spent, time invested, or just kind of that technical debt you're trying to unravel. Well, just leave it be and find another problem to go solve. A lot of thoughts, though.
That actually is another argument for a point I was making earlier, which is that the designs that we build for reports, they're not so valuable that we should keep them for years. And one of the reasons is that if you maintain something past when the person who designed it leaves and you never re-architected it, then you may lose the institutional knowledge of what it does and why. And so if you've got something that's important, you need to re-architect it more often than you churn employees. Just so you don't forget. Now, maybe that's not true for some software project. There are some types of projects where that's not feasible, and then you need really good documentation, and you need a full application lifecycle management approach, and basically now you're shipping full-on software. You got to do everything that Microsoft does for Power BI. But if you're just building a dashboard, hey, if that VBA is so complicated, just throw it out the window and start over. If it really is going to take you that long to fix it, then you gotta do it anyway, because otherwise, when you retire, what's going to happen? And it may take you a year, but yeah.
Some good comments here from Fernando. How much someone looks at a PBI executive report is how much interest he or she may have in improving the job at all. I completely agree. In our department, we put in some VBA to actually write to a SharePoint list to determine who is opening a report, at what cadence, especially in alignment with our delivery.
Mm-hmm.
I think in our first kind of 60 to 90 days of implementing that, we probably killed about 80 reports because nobody was opening them. They were just going out for years and years and years. And whenever you ask someone, does this have value? They go, yes. I get that every day. But then they actually didn't ever open it. They never used it. It's that busy work that is very easy to steal someone's time from. I think Power BI kind of masked that a little bit with the scheduled refresh. Like you don't have to be in something every day, especially if it is just kind of the standard layout and you've never changed that report page. After a while, it could lose tangible value, and then people just move on to another report. So kind of the maintenance mode of these things, it's just, I think that's where also Power BI is good. If nobody looks at a report, it will stop refreshing the data after a specific time. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Just very interesting, though, just how much time can be kind of lost in a report, either in a positive way if you're doing some exploration, or in kind of the negative way where it was a rush, got to get it done. It's going to go out to hundreds and hundreds of people, and you send it out and you see only like 5 people open it. You're like, oh, yeah. I guess that wasn't as meaningful or as important as kind of we originally thought. But if you have a cube in which you're just connecting to and you're just doing some drag and drop, who cares, right? Like, it's this golden data set. If everyone can rally around it, that's perfect. But I don't know. That's still very utopian, I guess, in nature. I don't know of a lot of companies that are there yet with kind of the certified or promoted data sets.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. There's a comment here about disabling personal workspaces, and
what do they want?
Yeah. Well, they want to be able to disable personal workspaces. We see this request a lot internally. I mean, I'm not on the product team, but there's an internal forum, and we see it in there a lot, where people are like, hey, we don't want people publishing to their personal workspace. And
I'm 50-50 on it.
I definitely think that if you're building a permanent project, personal workspaces are bad. Part of it is because they're still sort of V1 workspaces and not V2 workspaces. But part of it is, ownership management. But also, coming back to the PowerPoint for data, for people to use the product who are not BI professionals, which is super important, they need to be able to build something and not feel like they're going to mess it up. And personal workspace is part of that. And I mean, if you had to ask me what the biggest problem with Power BI is, it's not that we can't format our chart legends well, and it's not that there's some enterprise feature that's missing. It might be that we can't check in our models to source control and do feature branches, but that's actually not the biggest problem. That's my biggest problem. The biggest problem is that when people start with Power BI, it's too easy for them to build something that's wrong. When people start with Excel or with PowerPoint, especially PowerPoint, they can't build something that's wrong. What they do doesn't totally screw them over for the next thing they're going to do. And in Power BI, if you start working and there's so many different things you can do that you never would have thought of that are going to screw you. And taking away personal workspaces would be another way in which the pressure to do something good is on. And that makes it harder for people to learn and adopt. And while I understand that if you're managing a premium capacity or you're distributing reports to other people, those things are important. But the pressure of the people should be what makes it hard, not that the product makes it so that you're under pressure.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I might come back and write that one down after the fact. That was a good one. I like personal workspaces. I think the part that I don't like is the ability to share content from them. So for me, if it was purely just a sandbox experience, or I can create a report, either up in the service or kind of upload my own localized development for educational purposes or just exploration. Once again, if a personal workspace did not have a sharing component, I would love it.
Yeah. And
Just knowing it right now that you can share from them, um, it's just such a people build content, they share because they don't have a collaborative workspace to develop in because there's some type of restriction.
or they
Then
just don't know about workspaces.
yeah, they don't. So it comes back to like the health and the wealth of the environment. What is
Yeah.
it that you're kind of creating in this self-service, or is it IT lockdown? Yeah, I don't know.
So
I like them. I would love to see some certain things improved around them for sure, though.
yeah. Yeah. Now, fortunately, if you license sort of the most common way, which is that you put a few people on Pro and you get a couple premium capacities, you can't really share from My Workspace unless you're a Pro. And so that's
Well, you can assign my workspace to a premium
yeah,
license.
don't do that.
Yeah, I know.
Once again, some things are bad, and that's bad. So, and we were in this. Alex and I were in this presentation Melissa was giving, and we were talking about Melissa Coates, who's, fantastic. Can't say enough good things about her. We were talking about should you tightly manage the workspaces that exist, and I don't think so. There's some really compelling reasons to have a naming scheme and have a organization of workspaces, but at the same time, workspaces are too granular for that. You basically should have a workspace for each author audience pair, and if your company's big, that's a lot of workspaces, and IT doesn't want to make those for you.
And I know we got a few admins here in the chat too. So I mean, big takeaway for me, governance, right? Like, what is the environment that you're creating? If it is just purely self-service, just kind of let people go and build to their heart's content. Eventually, there may be kind of a scale limit or kind of a grow-up story where if there is going to be like a form-based process to get to a more advanced or pro kind of development team, what does that form look like? Or is it just more, hey, we're just opening the floodgates, letting people find value, letting them build their own projects to scale, kind of determining their own kind of budgeting needs to their organization, to their project, etc. There's no right way to do it. There are a lot of wrong ways to do it, though, right? But it truly is an adventure for each organization and each user.
Yeah. I think we can pretty much wrap up there. I want to respond to a couple more comments in the chat here, which is someone said that I would be their ally in getting APIs prioritized, and the answer to that is a definitive no. I only want desktop hardening, and if I was in charge of the product, I would say that getting people that are not BI pros to use Power BI is much more important than anything that would make an admin happier. And so, yeah. In terms of enterprise features, once we can do source control, they should just pack it up for a while and only make it easier for folks that don't use it all the time.
I like how everyone's beating up on me. They're like, tell Alex, him. I've been yelling at this for ages and ages and ages, so trust me. Just because I got a new position does not mean my vote is increased by any way, shape, or form, but everyone's well aware kind of the areas that we want to kind of close the gap on. I think that especially with the V2 coming to general availability for workspaces, we should see a lot more advancements whenever they're not having to do this awkward split environment of kind of V1s and V2s and personal workspaces being V1s only. I'm excited though. The more we close the gap on the past of Power BI and kind of the original architecture, the more that they can kind of do in the future. So
Yeah.
I just want to see scripting for Power Query on the desktop. So once again, I'm a little bit in the Alex D camp here, where it's like, hey, if we could do some improvements on the desktop experience. I also don't want to be selfish, though. I think that the report builders have been, I don't want to say like suffering, but I would love to see some type of automation for their side.
Yeah.
Just because,
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it.
Competitively, it seems to me that while we definitely don't have a perfect admin and enterprise experience, we're so far ahead there.
Yeah.
That like, yes, we could make the product better, but wouldn't help us sell more of the product. Maybe a little on the margins. But if we can make the initial authoring experience better, whether it means having more control over your legends and formatting so people don't get frustrated because they can't figure out how to do their idea when they don't know the whole product, or we can make it easier for people not to make mistakes, like that's what's going to help grow the product. And you all are already Power BI customers. So while, yes, we want to make you happy, it seems like the more important thing is to make sure that other people become Power BI customers. So, yeah.
Just right across the board, though, is quality of life improvements that return time to you. Like, I don't want you to have to do 10 hours worth of customizations if you could do it in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's always these little quality of life improvements that I look at. And I mean, my list is so incredibly minute and like the gaps that I want to close. And you're like, well, that would bring, 1 million more people to the product. Well, no, but it'll save the 5 or 10 seconds to the people that are doing it day in, day out. So that's what I'm always excited about.
Yeah. Well, Alex, I think we should wrap up there.
Yeah.
I know you're pretty good ways into your day. I'm actually gonna stay on here for a few minutes. I was chatting last night with Jeff in New Zealand about calculation groups, and I told him I'd record a quick video of what I was talking about. So I'm gonna do that now, and
Awesome.
I'll probably just stay live for it. But if folks
Sweet.
want to take off or you want to go mow the lawn, have a good one.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Alex.
Yeah.
Enjoy your weekend. Thanks, everyone,
Thank
as
you.
well.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah. Okay. Let me go to my screen. And let's actually go to my screen here. And let's go do this. Okay. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to do some calculation group stuff. And I think in here I've got a good data set to start with. So let's start there. Oh yeah, Johnny, you see that icon down there? That, it's been fun to play with. Honestly, I don't use it very much. But our cube is largely done, and I'm not an active developer. I just, mostly I just want to know what's in production, and so Tabular Editor 2 is fine. Because I don't need IntelliSense, and I don't need the model view because I have that in desktop. And so I got the preview back before. We're not going to buy it. Now, if I was starting a new project, I would probably build it into the project plan and just say we have to buy it. Having said that, I haven't actually seen the pricing. But for a new project where you're going to write a lot of DAX, it's definitely the way to go. But we've written most of our DAX, and my developers don't really use Tabular Editor 2 that much, and that's fine. Anyway, what do we want to do? So, what I was talking to Jeff about was we can create calculation groups for time intelligence, and they work great. But there's some edge cases where they don't work well. So I'm going to try to copy my calculation group from our production model and move it into this demo model and start from there. So for the first bit, we're just going to be setting up the demo. So I'm not actually recording the thing I'm going to send to Jeff, but feel free to hang out, and I will try to read the chat while we wait on various things. So, but while we're... See, that's the other frustrating thing, is that as I've updated through the various versions, it hasn't rebound this button to the updates. But let's use Tabular Editor 3, because why not? So let's connect to our local instance here. And what we need to do is create a calculation group. Great. And what I like to do is to have time intelligence split across 3 different calculation groups. Period comparison, prior period, and period to date. And the reason is because these 3 different types of patterns can be combined. So you may want to know the prior year's year-over-year growth, or the year-to-date of the prior year. And so rather than trying to have all those patterns built out, you just have multiple calculation groups that you then layer together. So why? I'm having trouble bringing up our existing code. Let me try one more time. There we go. So, oh, you guys can't see the right panel. Thank you. Let me unlock that. Get this resized. That's better. And then let's look at what we have and just start copying items. So I wish this was sorted, but here we go. Period comparison. So I always like to include a base value in my calc group, so you can always pass through. So I also always have the column name in the calc group be the same as the table name. So base value is just selected measure. And then this is our year-over-year pattern. We want to use year here. No, right. This wants to just reference a date column. So what is up with our IntelliSense? There we go. And this is year over year. That's the absolute value. And we're just going to keep on trucking with this. Percent. Oops. And is there a keyboard shortcut for creating a new? I feel like no. I'm just going to change all of these at the end. I think I can use find and replace rather than fixing them. Now this is half, and so one of the things that I've always struggled with, and I don't know if you guys have opinions on, is what should the name here be to denote that this is absolute value, right? Like, we use the $sign for revenue when we do absolute year over year or period over period measures, but there's no guarantee with the calculation group that the base measure will be in a currency. And so, yeah, I guess the pipe symbol like this basically could work. That's something to think about. Yeah. It's a little different, right? It's not the absolute value. It's just like the non-ratio, which is why we just leave it this, because it's like the year over year. It was just the difference. And then the percent is something, a modification of that. But, and, percent. Okay. So we've got this group made up. Okay, so let's see if we can then, can I replace across multiple measures in TE3? Look in entire model. There we go. And then we want to replace this with this. And let's hit replace all. Okay, so why didn't this do... so why isn't looking in the entire model? Interesting. Okay, well, let's just do some quick copy-paste jujitsu. Let's look in the current document. And let's... Okay. Not as efficient as searching the whole model, but I don't know why that wasn't working. Yeah, your diff is decent. Okay, great. So anyway, we could continue this pattern on for so what is this erroring for now? Okay, good. We could continue this pattern on and do period comparison, prior period, but for this example, we don't actually need it. So I'm going to go ahead and save to the model. And then we need to refresh the model because calculation groups require a process recalc. to work. So now we've got period comparison here, and we can put this on columns, and we can say, no, let's do something, conferences. And then we need a measure. So sum of total revenues, that should be good. Okay, so here we've got this. Let's go back to our calc group and let's do some basic formatting stuff. So these ones, we're in this format string. I feel like there's a, see, in this one, I feel like maybe it just does this for measures. So, yeah, let me, so in this, for measures, you actually get the, like, you don't actually have to know the format strings. But it seems like for calculation groups in Tabular Editor, it doesn't give you the whole thing. You can just do the expression, but that'll work just fine. So what's the error now? Is there an error? Is it going to tell me? Doesn't say. I don't think it's ridiculous. These tools are easy enough to use, and like, it would be nice to not need to use it, but like, if you had a list of features that you wanted implemented, would this really be the top of your list? Oh, I see. It needs to be in quotes. Like, would having a UI for this really top out being able to edit your legends and do all the visual stuff? I don't think so. I mean, it would have been nice if they just scoped the UI into the original feature, but they didn't, and you know, this is where we are. And of course, the reason that happened is because the desktop team and the engine team are totally different, and so their resources are different. So, like, yeah. Okay, so we've got our format strings, so that's better. Okay, so now I'm going to start recording here. So here's the scenario we're looking at. I've got one measure, and it works great with the calculation group. And if I want to have, you know, just a couple, I really only care about, you know, these metrics for this measure. And then I've got another measure. Say, okay, so let's say for this metric, I do care about month over month change. Oh, and we better put a date context into this, or it's going to be a little silly. So let's say we're looking at this field and here, and we only care about May 2015. Let's just see. Oh, in this data, we only have yearly data. Okay. Well, that's going to complicate things a little bit for the example that we want. And okay. Well, we can still do the same example. So Why isn't it showing me? Yeah, okay. So I don't have a good other data set to use. So we'll just stick with this data set rather than trying to do. So I've got revenue and I want to show these metrics. But say I've got another metric, maybe something where the absolute value isn't as important, more as the change. So let's say debt service. I don't really care what the total dollar value of debt service is. Ugh, no, we're not using that metric because the name is too long. So let's rename this. And let's rename this to revenue. Okay. So I don't actually care about the base value for debt service or the year over year. I just want to know the percent change in debt service. That's all I want to do. So for this visual, I can't, right? What I have to do now is I have to make measures for each of these 6 things and to make the visual that I want. So let's just do that really quick. This measure is going to be revenue year over year equals, unfortunately it's really easy because we can just use our time intelligence. Period comparison equals year over year, and we're done. And do a new measure. And see, this is an example of why, like I don't necessarily need tabular editor 3 because unless I'm going to be writing more than 5 measures, like it doesn't make sense to me to switch over to tabular editor 3 just to write the measure. Comma period comparison equals year over year percent. Okay. Need your quotes. Okay. So now, and then we need to do new measure again. Debt year over year percent. Calculate debt, comma, period comparison equals percent. Okay, so now I have my new visual and this one doesn't work. There we go. And now I have the visual that I wanted to create to start with. But sort of one of the main reasons to use these time intelligence calculation groups is so I don't have to create all my year-over-year patterns for all of my, dozen metrics. But lots of users like this type of thing. So like some metrics we want to see the base value and the prior year and the year over year, and some metrics we just want to see the prior month and the year over year, and within one visual. And so carried out to its natural conclusion, you just end up with all your users making all these patterns. And then rather than having the central model have what they need, they're writing DAX. And yes, it's the world's easiest DAX, but it's not so great. So that's the demo that I wanted to do for Jeff. I'm going to restart my recording and try and do this concisely. So here we go. Here's a visual. I've got 2 measures and some time periods, and I've got my calculation group setting up my time periods, but I don't actually want this visual. I want this visual, where I only show some of the calculation items for some of the measures and other calculation items for other measures. And the only way to do that is to make measures out of our calculation items plus our base measures, which is the same number of measures as if we had just never used calculation groups to begin with. It's less code, it's easier, but it's still not quite the full vision of calculation groups. Yeah. Great. That's the end of my little demo for Jeff, and I'm going to send this to him. Yeah. Before I sign off, any other questions? Anything came up while we were looking at these? Yeah, exactly, Theo. We just took measures and we cherry-picked from the calculation item table to make the visual that we wanted. And if you watch sort of some of the things Jeff's been doing, or the presentation 10 Fingers gave, which I think was like also the New Zealand crew, they're using calculation groups and calculation items to do really cool things with specific visuals. Yeah, if Microsoft could just do what Jeff wants, like, obviously the product would be better. I don't know if it would be a more competitive product, but it would definitely be better. And yeah. Yeah, exactly, Theo. It does undo the thing that calculation groups are trying to fix. But at the same time, if you want this visual design, there's no other way to do it. So I want to be able to make this visual without having my users have to write DAX, or my model team having to write every single measure out for them. It is less DAX still, because this is like the world's easiest DAX, right? There's no copy pasting. If we have to change a time intelligence pattern, say, like if we come back to our time intelligence patterns, this pattern doesn't do a lot to handle, I mean, it has some blank logic, but it doesn't handle every blank condition where it would be invalid. And so say I wanted to add more logic to handle invalid comparisons, like say my current period isn't complete, so it needs to filter out the current period because it doesn't make sense to compare a incomplete current year to a complete prior year. Like, we could just do it in one place. So we have saved that, but we haven't actually reduced the number of measures or eliminated this sort of unbounded gross problem where every time you add a measure, you have to add how many time patterns. Because if we go back here, I've got, you know, how many time patterns is this? Especially when you start to combine them. So if we had to do that for every measure, well, we can't. So, but I've reached the point where I've told my team for revenue, we're just going to have to make all these patterns as measures because so many users want to use them. And in Excel, they can't create measures like this. So anyway, those are my thoughts on calculation groups. Have a good weekend, everyone. Last call for questions. And goodbye.